Last night I watched a documentary on Netflix Watch Instantly called Solitary Confinement, and I had ran into it when I was browsing for different titles a couple days ago, and I immediately thought, I don't want to watch this, but sometimes when I feel resistance to something because it might be triggering or depressing, I decide I'm going to watch it to kind of move through my resistance and see what I learn. And it was depressing, and for anyone who's empathic watching something like that, you can kind of imagine what it would be like to be in an 8x10 cell for over 10 years. Over 80,000 people in America are in solitary confinement, or more, since this movie was made a few years ago. And one of the things that really grabbed me and has stuck with me from this film was this one person talked about, it was one of the, I think a psychologist or a doctor, said that the part of the brain that processes loneliness is the same part of the brain that processes physical pain. So there's this intrinsic connection between loneliness and physical pain. And for anyone who's experienced loneliness, you can understand that there's a similar kind of feeling. And physical pain relates to helping you survive. I've heard there's some people who they have a nervous system disorder that doesn't allow them to feel pain, and they tend to injure themselves a lot. They frequently get burnt or bruised because being able to feel pain helps you to avoid potential threats. So there it is, that part of the brain, avoiding potential threats. So loneliness is perceived by the brain as a potential threat. And that is because, I believe, we come from a tribal background on a genetic level. And part of the process of becoming an individual who is centered and grounded and at peace means rewiring your brain, essentially. We have a very malleable brain. And for example, I was thinking recently about how I haven't celebrated Christmas for a few years because I don't believe Jesus was a real person. And I was thinking recently about how when I was a child, I was basically conditioned through gifts, through not having to go to school, through a little wall hanging in the hallway of my childhood, counting down the days, building up the anticipation and excitement, and just seeing how that was so conditioned to get excited about that experience. But now it's a neutral thing for me, and so my brain has changed, the wiring has changed within me. And with the concept of loneliness changing away from that instinctual drive towards it causing pain, because there is safety in numbers. If you are living as a chimpanzee, then you're more likely to survive the harsh elements if you are part of a tribe. But that doesn't have to be the case with humans, and a lot of times on the spiritual path you need to break away from individuals that are not enhancing your development and growth or supporting you becoming who you are, because it becomes too uncomfortable to compromise and settle and play along with other people's games or kind of lower yourself to their vibration if they're not willing to meet you in an authentic place. So there's not very many, advanced spiritual masters who would be devastated if they had to spend a year in solitary confinement. They would just be present with what was. But for the rest of us, it's a very scary thought. And the people in this film, they went there because they had assaulted other prisoners or guards, usually not because of their original crime, but because of what they did once they were in prison. So I can understand why they're there, but it is very difficult to see people in such a confined space. And this relates to that external dependency. These people in this film were trying all these tricks to communicate with people in nearby cells, tossing out pieces of paper, unraveling sheets to get strings that they could grab these other pieces of paper, little fishing kind of thing, and they knew they could get an additional 6 months if they're caught of solitary confinement. But that impulse, that drive to connect with other people is so strong. So, what do we do with this if we're in a situation where we can face loneliness and feel discomfort with it? One of the wisest things I've heard is from Osho, who stated, "Loneliness is the absence of the other. Aloneness is the presence of oneself." And this is what I have found. I used to feel very compulsively needy towards connecting with others if I was uncomfortable. But the presence of myself, by just being with myself and rewiring my brain through changing my thoughts from, oh, to be alone is horrible, to just experience presence, because that's where true peace resides, is in presence. And you can experience that anywhere, no matter what your circumstances are. There's one guy in this film who would meditate on a daily basis, and he said that was his place to go, and he seemed the most grounded of all the various people they interviewed that were incarcerated. If you can allow yourself to stop fighting against what is in all areas of life, because that's where a lot of suffering comes from, is the thought process that says, I wish things were different than they were. And what feels like a catch-22 when you are facing loneliness is that you may be tempted to ameliorate that loneliness by just being with anyone. You know, you might get into a relationship with somebody just because they're available. You might, hang out with people you don't really connect with and kind of conform to whatever their norms are and that kind of thing like that. But that doesn't really feel good either. Now, if you're armored and you're not that sensitive to energy, then you might do that. And that's how a lot of people interact socially, is just kind of adjusting and conforming. But if you're at a place where, on a spirit level, you're feeling driven to be yourself, to truly be authentic and find out who you are, then you might face some aloneness. So instead of focusing on the absence of the other, focusing on the presence of yourself, your own presence, your own freedom, your own ability to do what you want to do, to focus upon what you want to focus upon, that's all part of allowing your aloneness to be a pleasant experience, and to not be limited to primal instincts to be a tribal creature. And as you do this, and you focus on your own energy, and you become yourself, then naturally there's a kind of magnetic force that allows the tribe that unfolds, even if it doesn't unfold as fast as you would prefer it to, it's going to unfold in a way that's more congruent and rewarding than anything you've known before. Because when you know yourself, you know what kind of interactions you enjoy, and you nourish those kinds of connections in your life. So those are some thoughts on this process of getting away from loneliness being connected to physical pain. Our brains have a certain plasticity to them, so even if we have certain genetic tendencies, we can change that over time with practice and educating ourselves. Thanks for listening.